Are you confused on how your genes may be impacting your health issues? Have you been told that it's your genes, or have you read that your genes have little to do with it and it's more about the environment? There's a lot of conflicting information out there, and many people do not understand how genetic factors are actually a part of the puzzle. In this video, I'm going to explain the big picture and how your genes and environment are working together to create what I call a perfect storm that is causing your health challenges. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about the differences between genetics and epigenetics. Epigenetics being the environment we live in terms of the chemicals and heavy metals we're exposed to, the emotional stressors, the chronic infections that we have. All these things are stressors or roadblocks that impact our genes and create a perfect storm into why people are suffering. And so if you have chronic health issues, you want to understand that there's a balance between your genetics and your environment. The problem is there's a wide spectrum of where people fall on this, meaning that there are some people out there that their philosophy and teachings are basically that it's the gene, and here's a supplement, here's the nutrient that you have to take for this gene, and it's a be all end all. And then there's other people that say, well, the genetic component has nothing to do with it. It's about how maybe the genes get expressed, or the bigger factor is the environment, the stressors that we have and that are taxing on our bodies day in, day out, that are creating dysfunction. But the thing is big picture, there's kind of an area where we kind of fall in the middle. And so you have to take into consideration, yes, there is a genetic component, but you also take into consideration the lifestyle and the environment components on how that plays into where you are a little bit weaker genetically. And so to really give a great understanding and description of this, we're going to use this highway analogy. And this is something that I use with patients. This is something we use in our teachings, and it's something that really sticks with people. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use this concept of a highway, or this concept of traffic on a highway, to really kind of hone in on this concept of genetics versus epigenetics. So what I usually tell patients is that genetics is basically the infrastructure of our highway. It's the road that we drive on. And the cars on the road are those epigenetic factors. So if we look at this picture right here, you can see there's three different scenarios. On the far left there is a highway that's got about 8 lanes, okay? And if somebody genetically has no variants or SNPs or no problems with a specific gene, it's like you have an 8-lane highway for traffic flow. Now, what happens is if we have one genetic mutation or one SNP, one variant, those terms can be used interchangeably. It's termed heterozygous. What it's like, though, from an infrastructure standpoint, it's like instead of having an 8-lane road to travel on, we have a 4-lane road. And when you have that, the enzyme or the protein, wherever that gene makes, is no longer going to be able to function 100%. So it's kind of estimated that if you have one variant and your highway narrows from 8 lanes down to 4, you've got maybe about a 30% reduction in how effective that enzyme can work. Okay, so it's maybe capped out at 70% function. And if you look at the far right picture there, you see a 1-lane road. That's like having 2 variants. So if both mom and dad pass down a mutation on a given gene, well, your highway narrows from 8 lanes down to 1. So if you're driving through a big city and you're on a major interstate and it's 8 lanes, and then all of a sudden you come up to an exit and they made the road faulty and the highway narrows down from 8 lanes down to 1. But that can be very problematic. But the thing is it's problematic if there are a lot of cars on the road. Because if it's 3:30 in the morning and there's one car on the road, it doesn't matter if you have 8 lanes or 1 lane, traffic's still going to move. But if you're talking about rush hour in a major city and they built the road faulty where it narrows from 8 lanes down to 1, and you've got thousands of cars on the road, you've got gridlock. All right. And so we talk about this relationship between genetics and epigenetics. We're talking about how you go into this with a weakened genetic predisposition where your highway or your chemistry has a likelihood to have less lanes or slower functioning enzymes that can create bottlenecks when you put more cars on the road, when you can put more chemicals in the body. We get, chronic infections, abnormal gut bacteria, emotional stress. All those things are going to put more traffic on the road, which then is problematic. So if we have a one-lane road, it's like we only have about 10 to 40% enzymatic function. So we can have 60, 90% loss of what that enzyme is capable of doing. So when we're talking about the genetic aspect, what we're talking about is the concept of how many lanes do you have. And so when the people that kind of talk about this, that the genetics has very, very little to do with it, they're kind of right at some point, because the thing is it becomes about the traffic. And the thing is if you have no traffic on the highway, then you most likely are not going to have any issues. All right. And then the people that have a scenario where they scream that it's all about the genetics, well, they're trying to support things to get traffic moving, to either support aspects where there's that one lane road, or to be preventative and not allowing traffic to start congesting. So genetics versus epigenetics, we kind of give a little bit of a reduction on that last slide. But what are epigenetics? These are actually stressors, all right, that cause our pathways to slow down. And these are things that add stress to our biochemistry. They add stress to the gene, they add stress to the enzyme, okay? These are what we call stressors or barriers or roadblocks in our biochemistry. And this could be anything and everything, bacteria, mold, heavy metals, viruses, Lyme co-infections, parasite, food allergy aspects, chemicals in the food we eat, candida aspects, the medications we're taking, physical traumas, emotional stressors. All those things put traffic on the highway and can create that perfect storm. So if you go into this with a genetic predisposition where your infrastructure, all right, based on what mom and dad gave you, you go into it with less lanes for traffic to flow, you start putting enough traffic on the highway, you're going to start noticing that there's going to be some type of stress on your body. And typically that reflects in chronic symptoms. And so a lot of times what happens is people from a genetic standpoint say, well, I've had this gene my whole life. Why is it just affecting me now in terms of symptoms and health challenges? Well, it comes down to you've always had that one lane road, or you've always had that 4-lane road. And now what's happened is over a lifetime, you've accumulated this increased toxic load, and you've been putting more and more traffic on the highway year in, year out, to the point now where traffic is at a standstill. And so to truly recover and to truly heal from this, what you want to do is you want to remove traffic, because here's the thing, you're not going to change the amount of lanes that are available. This is your genetics. You're not going to be able to do things to change the amount of lanes that mom and dad gave you from a functional standpoint. But what you can control is you can control two things. You can control how traffic moves, and you can control how much traffic's on the road in the first place. So when we're talking about supporting things from a genetic perspective, genetics gives us a roadmap. Genetics gives us a indication of what rabbit holes we need to go down to investigate a little bit deeper, because if you've got areas of one lane highways, that in turn, most of the time is going to be problematic, because that's where your traffic is going to start gridlocking up. So the goal is to take all that traffic and turn it into a highway that has little to no traffic or moving traffic. Now, one thing I always like to tell patients of mine is they look at their genetic reports and they're like, okay, I don't have a mutation. Okay, I don't have any issues with my MTHFR or my COMT gene or whatever the gene may be. But here's the thing, if you put enough traffic on the highway, it doesn't matter if you have genetic variants or not. And that's where a lot of the people that talk about it's more about the environmental components, is because if you put enough stress in the body, it doesn't matter how many lanes you have to flow. You still want to make sure that you are addressing traffic flow, and more importantly, reducing the amount of traffic that's on the highway in the first place. So this is a description of this concept of genetics and epigenetics, and I hope that it gives some clarification and kind of a big picture viewpoint, a big picture kind of mindset in how these two things relate, and can be a big missing piece of the puzzle in terms of why you're suffering with the condition you're suffering with. We'll see you next time.